I want to thank everybody for having the opportunity to speak today. For those of you that don't know us, InterbrandHealth is a company that develops and assesses identity, so visual and verbal, for the healthcare and life sciences industry. And what I want to touch on today is a number of the same subjects. So how do we extend brands as well as the whole modifier issue? The first question, so how do companies decide on a naming strategy when the active ingredient is already marketed? And we heard and completely agree with what Nancy had said, that it's examined on a case-by-case basis. Very often we determine the strategy very early on in the development program for a name, and we examine it through qualitative research methods. We've used FMEA to look at the naming construct to see what's appropriate and which is least likely to cause error. The other thing we've begun examining is we've actually gone out and, again, anecdotally asked health providers if you have a new product formulation, what would you prefer? What is least prone to error, introducing a modifier versus introducing a new name? And again, on a macro level, what we've heard is approximately 50% of the nurses and pharmacists we spoke to would prefer a new name. Now, this has to be further evaluated. We want to look at physician perspective as well, but it is a starting point. What criteria do we recommend to determine modifier acceptability? So, of course, the modifier is easy to communicate. We run simulations to understand correct interpretation. We ask physicians to script the names so we can compare the script for the new formulation versus the old. The modifier differentiates the product formulations and aids in product selection. This is a critical piece we discussed for all the issues that were reviewed today. The modifier meaning is consistent and not ambiguous to end users. So we typically test, does the modifier have an established meaning on its own? We also examine whether or not the modifier, how it impacts the existing base or root name. We will also examine it from the perspective of the product context. Is it appropriate? And ultimately, will it lead to error? The modifier will not be confused with existing names. One of the major points raised today was, or in the questions was, what do we do with device modifiers? And look-alike, sound-alike names really come into play in that situation more so than, I guess, the two-letter. And then we examine whether or not the modifier is in use in the therapeutic category. Can we standardize? And I would say we even examine if it's in use in general. So again, will there be confusion in terms of messaging? I guess the key question we want to look at is modifier standardization possible? And I think we all agree that a system that categorizes modifiers for common formulation changes should lead to greater consistency and ultimately less confusion. But I think the critical point there is common formulation changes. We would strongly recommend that, because of industry innovation, I mean, that's something that hasn't really been touched on. Drug development, product development is going in a lot of different directions. And the product variation. We're working on a number of initiatives now where there's an extension of the product where nomenclature just does not exist. So we need to have that flexibility because we've seen in research that if we don't have that nomenclature, I think there was a comment made that maybe we should move the modifier out of the proprietary name. Well, we've done research with physicians who, if you don't have that modifier, they begin making up their own names for the product. I mean, we haven't touched on that. So is that a greater failure mode where you're talking about standardization and everybody's making up their own names? I mean, that's a whole nother issue, not to lay more on this. So in conclusion, how prescriptive should the modifier guidance be? Well, ultimately, we believe standardization is the goal, but there definitely needs to be some flexibility into the guidance developed. Unfortunately, I was up here a couple of years ago. It's all about predictability. It's still interpretive, and I think that's a challenge we're going to face, and that's not going away. But to close, one area just, maybe we want to look to EMA or the European Union. Their guidance document, they've had, it's pretty broad. And it leaves open the opportunity for sponsors and applicants to justify their nomenclature strategy. The other really important point is since they released the guidance in 1999, there have been 5 revisions to it. So I would say, and again, I don't know the procedural issues, but this needs to evolve as industry evolves. I don't think it can be set in stone as one guidance for all situations. I think if it has the opportunity to evolve and be revised, I think that would be in the best interest of everybody involved. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak and look forward to hearing where we net out with this.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jerry Phillips, President and Chief Executive Officer,